Hi, it's Katrina. The Sun may have a twin. In a region past Neptune on the outer reaches of our solar system, there is a massive collection of ancient space debris called the Oort cloud, which doesn't fit into scientific models of how the solar system formed. In trying to explain how this happened, a pair of scientists proposed that the Sun has a long-lost twin, and that the two stars spent their early days accumulating these items from interstellar space. If the Sun does have a twin, it separated from its orbit with the Sun long ago and ended up in a totally different part of the Milky Way. The Oort cloud may be the legacy left behind by this former solar presence, which would explain why it contains more objects than it should. In simple terms, the Sun may have worked with its theoretical twin to capture the 100 billion objects that exist in the Oort cloud today. Our Sun alone wouldn't have had a strong enough gravitational pull to do this on its own. But there would have been enough pull if it were working in tandem with a star roughly the same size, according to scientific calculations. This binary orbit between the Sun and its twin may have been broken by a third star, leaving the Oort cloud behind as the only existing evidence of the twin. The theory not only makes sense, it falls in line with the fact that many solar systems orbit around two stars, suggesting that ours was no different at an earlier point in time. For now, the findings are speculative, but they are promising and worth looking into. A tsunami of gravitational waves. Gravitational waves are ripples in the fabric of space-time. They are caused when large masses accelerate. For example, when extremely dense objects like black holes and neutron stars get locked into a binary orbit and ultimately merge with one another. Gravitational waves were detected for the first time in 2015. Since then, scientists have focused on improving their ability to spot them, and their work seems to be paying off. Between November 2019 and March 2020, researchers based in the US and Italy detected 35 separate gravitational wave events. That's more than a third of the 90 that have been discovered to date. Study co-author Susan Scott explained in a statement that the increased detections are revealing a lot about the life and death of stars throughout the universe. 32 of the events resulted from black holes colliding. The data shows that black holes are surprisingly diverse. For example, while one pair was 145 times the mass of the Sun, another pair was only 18 times its mass. The researchers believe that the other three events were possibly caused by the merging of black holes with less dense objects such as neutron stars, which form from the explosions of supernovas. As the technology to detect gravitational waves improves, scientists expect to pick up more mysterious events. They hope to learn more about the objects that make gravitational waves and to create new ways to test the laws of gravity. A shipyard of ancient galaxies. Protoclusters are collections of young galaxies. In the words of science writer Patrick Pester, they are like shipyards where galaxies are built. Scientists recently discovered a protocluster 11 billion light-years from Earth, in a part of space that's just 3 billion years old. They reported their findings on the giant structure dubbed G237 earlier this year. An international team of researchers have confirmed its existence in a newly published follow-up study. They've identified 63 galaxies within G237, which study co-author Brenda Fry described as a star factory in overdrive. She further explained that scientists don't know much about protoclusters because they are too faint to be detected with optical light. The teams that observed G237 identified it in the far infrared region of the electromagnetic spectrum. In other words, they found it using a telescope that detects tiny wavelengths of radiation. Much to their surprise, G237 appears to be producing new stars extremely quickly and in huge amounts. The protocluster doesn't seem to have enough hydrogen to support the rate at which this is happening, leading researchers to suspect that it's gleaning hydrogen from threads of gas, or filaments, that link galaxies in what's known as the cosmic web. It's possible that G237 is situated along an intersection of these filaments, which would explain where it gets the steady supply of hydrogen that it needs to crank out new stars on a seemingly constant basis. Mysterious exploding object. Scientists detected a fast radio burst, or FRB, for the first time in 2007. Fast radio bursts are tiny pulses in the electromagnetic spectrum that last just a few thousandths of a second, but pack a serious punch, producing the same amount of energy that the sun does in a year. That is crazy intense. Some FRBs are singular events, while others repeatedly emit energy. One example of the latter is an object known as FRB 121102. Located in a galaxy 3 billion light-years away, it was recently the focus of a study that started out as a simple data collecting mission. Scientists noticed that it exploded 1,652 times over a 60-hour period, to the tune of up to 117 times per hour. They knew from previous research that sometimes FRBs are caused by a type of dead neutron star called a magnetar. These objects have ultra-intense magnetic fields, trillions of times stronger than that of the Earth, which causes them to behave unusually. If FRB 121102 is a magnetar, like one that astronomers detected in our galaxy last year, there is reason to believe that the bursts happen on the star's surface, rather than in the gas surrounding it. Simply put, FRB 121102 released energy in such quick succession it had to come directly from its surface. While the findings can help guide further research, FRBs and the bodies that cause them remain largely a mystery. If nothing else, the study provides a good starting point for learning more about them. What do you think could be causing these ongoing explosions? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. We've got lots more videos coming up. The moon's surface is full of oxygen. The lunar atmosphere is too thin to support oxygen-breathing life forms, but there's abundant oxygen inside the moon's top layer, known as the regolith. While as much as 45% of this layer is made up of the gas, it's trapped inside rocks and dust, making it impossible for earthly creatures to breathe in its current form. Soil scientist John Grant recently discussed the prospect of extracting oxygen from the lunar materials it binds to in order to make the moon's atmosphere habitable. He said that it could possibly be accomplished through something called electrolysis, but this would use up immense energy, requiring industrial equipment and energy sources that are capable of supporting the process. The first step would involve converting solid metal oxide into liquid form. A Belgian-based company plans to send 3 experimental reactors to the moon by 2025 to see if it's possible. If it is, then it will bring scientists one step closer to generating the type of oxygen we need to survive. Experts believe that a cubic meter of the lunar surface could generate enough oxygen for a human to live off of for 2 years. But theorizing and doing are two very different things, and whether or not their predictions will pan out remains to be seen. Still, it's a pretty amazing concept, literally mining oxygen to make the moon habitable for humans. Black holes might be growing. Scientists realized in recent years that black holes are much bigger than they expected them to be, but until recently they had no idea why. They now believe that this may be directly related to the fact that the universe is constantly expanding. According to a new theory known as cosmological coupling, all objects with mass are growing as the universe grows in the aftermath of the Big Bang. It's only natural, then, that black holes are also expanding, since they are some of the most massive objects that are known to exist. The theory was developed after scientists started observing black hole mergers, which is when 2 black holes get locked into orbit with one another and eventually collide. Researchers began tracking these events in 2015 using interferometers, which detect the gravitational ripples that occur when black holes smash into each other. They noticed that the waves didn't quite make sense, though. Based on previous calculations, black holes should be less than 40 times the mass of our Sun, but the ripples showed that some black holes are more than 50 solar masses, with some measuring nearly 100 solar masses. One possible explanation suggests that black holes grow by consuming gas, dust, stars, and other black holes. But this fails to explain how they expand in parts of the universe that lack these materials to feast on. Other proposals run too contrary to scientists' understanding of the universe to seem realistic, except perhaps the idea that the growth of black holes has something to do with the universe expanding. Using a theoretical model, researchers calculated that black holes may expand at a rate that coincides nicely with the growing universe. Cosmological coupling sounds crazy on the surface, but it's proven to be valid when it comes to other objects in the universe, so it's entirely possible that it applies to black holes as well. searching for life on Alpha Centauri. The closest star to our solar system, other than the Sun of course, is called Alpha Centauri. It's actually a triple star system, and it's located just 4.35 light years away from us. Scientists recently announced plans to search for habitable planets within Alpha Centauri as part of a space telescope mission called Ptolemy. Equipped with a unique lens, the telescope will enable researchers to detect irregularities in the movement of stars that indicate that there is a planet with gravity nearby. NASA engineer Eduardo Bendek explained in a statement that even nearby planets are difficult for experts to find. The Ptolemy telescope is extremely sensitive and will make the discovery process easier by detecting even the slightest gravitational movement. 2 of the 3 stars that make up Alpha Centauri are similar to our Sun. The third is a red dwarf, and there are 2 exoplanets orbiting around it that appear to be somewhat similar to Earth. Now, this doesn't automatically mean that they have an atmosphere that we could survive in. Scientists haven't investigated the exoplanets in enough detail to make any conclusive statements about whether they do, or if they could support oxygen-breathing life forms. The Ptolemy mission will try to answer that question by focusing primarily on what's known as the habitable zone around Alpha Centauri's 3 stars. This is an area where liquid water could possibly exist. Speaking with Space.com, Professor Peter Tuthill, who leads the mission's development, stressed the importance of getting to know our planetary neighbors. The team hopes to start doing just that by around 2025. Wormholes could be shortcuts through space-time. Have you ever fantasized about time travel? Many people do, though most of us have never thought that the crazy concepts in time travel stories could really be possible. You might be surprised to learn that scientists began speculating about time travel as far back as 1928, when mathematician and theoretical physicist Hermann Weyl proposed the idea of something that eventually became known as a wormhole. In simple terms, a wormhole is a structure that connects 2 very distant points in space-time, acting as a sort of shortcut between black holes that it would normally take an extremely long time to travel to and from. Experts don't know if wormholes actually exist, but they think it's possible. One major problem with the theory is that until recently, it seemed as though wormholes would instantly collapse, based on the laws of mathematics that are used to explain them. These laws, known as general relativity, are based on Albert Einstein's understanding of how gravity affects the fabric of space-time. They are fixed rules, but they allow for some freedom when it comes to using different metrics to describe a situation, and this can lead to different theoretical outcomes. Based on the metrics that scientists used in the past, wormholes are inherently unstable, but a new study plugged different metrics into the equation and found that wormholes might be stable after all. According to the research, a particle can hypothetically enter an event horizon, the area around a black hole that essentially marks the point of no return, and escape from the other side. The findings are fascinating but theoretical. The study only considers the role of gravity, and there are still numerous factors that indicate that if wormholes are real, they are unstable. In short, experts have a long way to go in order to truly understand whether wormholes are stable or if they even exist in the first place. What is Oumuamua? Our understanding of space is constantly changing. There is a lot scientists don't know, and sometimes discoveries have more to do with ruling certain things out than determining exactly what something is or how it works. Take, for example, Oumuamua, a huge object that was observed exiting our solar system in 2017 at 57,000 miles per hour, far too fast to have originated here. It was accelerating at a pace that gravity can't explain, and there were no signs of it containing any vapors or gases that might be propelling it. Scientists are having trouble figuring out exactly what this interstellar object is. A recent theory suggests that Oumuamua is a nitrogen iceberg, a chunk that broke off of a Pluto-like planet outside of our solar system. The presence of nitrogen would explain what's thrusting Oumuamua through space at such a high rate of speed. It also makes sense because nitrogen is present on Pluto and it's invisible to telescopes. Just as quickly as it was proposed, however, the nitrogen iceberg idea was shot down by astrophysicists at Harvard, who recently published a paper explaining why it's simply not possible. The team argued that the universe doesn't contain enough nitrogen to make an object as big as Oumuamua, which measures somewhere between 1,300 and 2,600 feet long. Moreover, pure nitrogen is rare and has only been detected on Pluto in extremely small amounts, according to the study's co-author Amir Siraj. But the authors of the nitrogen iceberg theory are standing by their findings. Astrophysicists Alan Jackson and Stephen Desch defended their research, claiming that the new study uses a lot of approximations and estimates, which conveniently fit the argument against their theory. As things currently stand, only one thing is clear when it comes to Oumuamua. The mystery of what it actually is remains unsolved. Nefertiti Bust. Around 1345 BC, an ancient Egyptian sculptor named Thutmose created a bust of Nefertiti, the wife of 18th dynasty pharaoh Akhenaten. Famous for her beauty, she was one of history's most iconic women. The bust was discovered in 1912 by German Egyptologist Ludwig Borchardt during an excavation of the studio of Thutmose. Although there are no inscriptions on the artifact identifying it as Nefertiti, experts believe it's her, due to the trademark blue crown she's been seen wearing in other depictions. The bust measures 19 inches tall and weighs 44 pounds. But what makes this particular discovery creepy is that the image of the queen, though beautiful, displays one empty eye socket, making the otherwise lovely image rather unsettling. Thutmose apparently inserted quartz into the pupils of Nefertiti's eyes, but one of the stones is missing. Because other images of the queen do not show any eye defects, experts believe that the quartz simply fell out and that it doesn't represent a real-life condition or injury. A CT scan performed on the bust in 2007 revealed that it was made from limestone covered in layers of stucco of varying thickness. The sculpted inner face was slightly different from the final product. The cheekbones were less prominent, there was less depth in the corners of Nefertiti's eyelids, and there was a slight bump on the ridge of her nose. Soon after its discovery, the bust became a symbol of pride in Berlin, where its caretakers were reluctant to cave in to Egypt's demands to turn the artifact over. The campaign to repatriate the Nefertiti bust began as soon as it went on public display in 1924. It is currently exhibited today in a museum in Berlin. Multiple missing persons' bodies. By now, you've most likely heard all about the disappearance and murder of Gabi Petito. She was a 22-year-old blogger from Long Island who vanished in September while traveling the country in a van with her boyfriend, Brian Laundrie. By the time her body was found, Laundrie had also gone missing, sparking a widespread manhunt across the country. The search turned up the remains of at least 5 other missing people, including 33-year-old Josue Calderon, 46-year-old Robert Lowry, 55-year-old Sarah Bayard, and 2 others who have yet to be identified at the time the news was revealed. Soon after that, the murdered bodies of newlywed couple Kylan Schult and Crystal Turner, who had crossed paths with Petito and Laundrie, were found in Utah. Schult had worked at a food co-op where Laundrie was seen slapping Gabi, leading some to suspect that the cases were linked. Authorities later proved that there was no connection, but the coincidence is eerie just the same. What's more disturbing about the discoveries is that the fact that all of these people may still be considered missing, if not for the intensive search for Laundrie. It makes you stop and wonder just how many bodies are out there, waiting to be found so that their loved ones can get some type of closure. A black hole on Google Earth. Many people today have made it a hobby to search Google Earth and Google Maps in search of strange landmarks. Earlier this year, one eagle-eyed Reddit user found what looked like a black hole in the middle of the ocean. Commenters speculated that the site is censored for some reason. Perhaps it's a top-secret military base or some other government facility. This is a credible theory. In 2017, journalists reported that Google often blurs out sensitive sites like prison yards and military bases. One thing almost everyone agreed on is that the black mark is not a natural formation. But one person said that they thought it could be an underwater volcano. Many people found the idea laughable, with some even joking that maybe the strange formation was the island from the TV show Lost. Another Redditor joked that it was a portal to a hollow Earth, playing on the popular conspiracy theory that the inside of the planet is empty or contains a substantial amount of space. One Redditor finally put the mystery to rest, revealing that the so-called black hole is actually very dark green, and that it is in fact an actual landmass known as Vostok Island. Situated northeast of New Zealand, the island belongs to the Pacific island nation of Kiribati. It gets its seemingly pitch-dark hue from the thick jungle foliage that covers the land. So in reality, the site isn't censored or secretive in nature. it's just dense with vegetation. Hidden hotel room. While staying at a motel with her grandmother, a TikToker named Addison Castle became curious about the strange-looking floor beneath her bed. The two decided to take a closer look. They got down on the floor and pulled an area rug away, revealing a cutout in the floor. Beneath the carpet was a board, which the pair also had to pull out of its place, revealing a secret room beneath the one they were staying in. The motel is only one story, which means that the hidden space is in the building's basement. It contained no electrical wires or plumbing fixtures, ruling out the possibility that it was used for those purposes. Castle shared footage of the eerie discovery on social media, mentioning that she couldn't see the end of the room, which freaked her out. The chilling find is just the latest of many hidden rooms, crawl spaces, and even an entire apartment that TikTokers have shared with their followers over the last few years. In early 2021, a woman named Samantha Hartsoe discovered an entire hidden apartment behind the bathroom mirror of her New York City home. She became suspicious after feeling a strange draft coming from behind the mirror, so she pulled it out of the wall, revealing the secret space. Samantha squeezed through the tiny hole leading to the room and found an old toilet, some garbage, and a discarded water bottle. While the discovery is admittedly rather uneventful, to find an entire apartment you didn't know about hidden behind the one you live in is unsettling, to say the least. Fungus that lures flies to their death. A recent study found that a relatively common fungus lures flies into having deadly intercourse with one another. The fungus, Entomophthora muscae, attracts healthy male flies to dead, infected females. The male mates with the corpse, becomes infected, and spreads the deadly spores to more flies. Gross. Dying at the mercy of E. muscae is slow and torturous. When a spore lands on a fly, it grows shoots that punch through the insect's exoskeleton and spread the fungus throughout its body, according to researchers from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. The growth eventually begins to pour from between the fly's armored segments. Once it reaches the brain, the fungus compels its host to go to a high place, somewhere ideal for spreading the spores that are pouring from its body. After that, the fly's job is done, and it dies. The recent study put healthy male flies near dead females who were both infected and uninfected. Researchers found that males were 5 times more likely to try mating with infected female flies. Research team member Andreas Hansen described the fungus as a deadly aphrodisiac of sorts. The team also determined that flies were far more attracted to flypaper traps that were covered in fungal spores. The study showed that certain chemicals are responsible for the boost in sexual behavior, and the findings could prove useful for developing pest control products. But in order to do that, scientists will need to figure out exactly which chemicals are attracting the flies. What do you think about this scary fungus with deadly spores? Let me know in the comments below. Gerbil tooth headdress. In modern-day Kenya, there is a 5,000-year-old gravesite called the Lothagam North Pillar. Situated in a sprawling field, it consists of burial mounds and pillars that took anywhere from 450 to 900 years to build. At the center of the 15,000-square-foot site, there is a stone platform measuring 100 feet in diameter. It contains a burial chamber that may have once held the remains of up to 580 people. This site doesn't seem to be dedicated to royals or elites, though. It's actually filled with the graves of ordinary tribe members of all ages and genders, who were indiscriminately laid to rest side by side. Nobody received preferential treatment, and most of the bodies were adorned with colorful jewelry. Yet one discovery stood out among the rest: a headdress made with over 400 gerbil teeth that came from 100 different gerbils. Because the species was not yet domesticated, the person who made the headdress went through the painstaking process of trapping the animals. Just imagine the amount of time and effort that went into creating this creepy but fascinating decorative item. Catching each gerbil, removing their teeth, and then making the actual headdress. Strange ancient graves. In 2016, archaeologists discovered one of Europe's oldest grave sites, dating back roughly 8,500 years to the Mesolithic period, near the German village of Groß-Freudenwald. The grave site contained 9 human skeletons, with 5 of them belonging to children younger than 6 years old, including a 6-month-old infant. At the time, Europe was home to numerous hunter-gatherer tribes. They were always on the move, according to forensic anthropologist Bettina Junklaus. so it's actually quite rare to uncover multiple Mesolithic graves in one place. Yet this cemetery was used for over 1,000 years, until around 7,000 years ago. Oddly, the burials are situated in a place where the soil was rocky and hard, making it difficult to dig graves. There were also no nearby water sources, making it a less than ideal location for a settlement. Lead excavation archaeologist Thomas Terberger took these factors as signs that the burials were carefully planned out, making this site a true anomaly among other European graves from the time period. Its strangest feature is the grave of a man who was buried upright with bone tools and flint knives. Even more strangely, he was only buried up to his knees, while the rest of his body was left to decompose until the rest of the grave was filled in. The man's skeleton shows no signs of him having performed hard labor during his lifetime, indicating that he was likely a skilled craftsman of some sort. He lived at a time when Europe's first farmers were settling in the region, so his remains may offer new insight into this transitional period, as well as the encounters between hunter-gatherers and those with a more agrarian lifestyle. Still, the biggest question of all is why the man was buried standing up. Experts are hoping that a DNA analysis will tell them if he migrated to the area from Russia, where similar graves have been found. Soviet-era bunker. The Cold War era was defined by mounting tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union as they tried to outcompete one another when it came to everything from nuclear weapons to developments in space. During that time, people feared that these tensions could erupt into war at any moment, so it was common for people to build fallout shelters beneath homes, businesses, and public buildings. As a result, many of these hidden spaces are still being discovered today. But it's rare to find a fallout shelter frozen in time, untouched since its abandonment. In 2017, an urban explorer going by the YouTube name Shai discovered a small concrete structure while wandering through an old factory in Russia. Video footage he captured shows him going through a dark corridor and then opening two giant metal doors to reveal a room chock full of old relics, with working ventilation and electricity. The items include gas masks, newspaper clippings, photos, tools, boots, medicine, clothing, and boxes full of equipment dating all the way back to World War II. There are coats still hanging on hooks, papers tacked to the wall, and what appears to be a designated sleeping area covered in clothing and survival equipment. The YouTuber didn't disclose the bunker's location, probably because he wasn't supposed to be there, so the details of the site remain shrouded in mystery, leaving viewers to draw their own conclusions about where the bunker might be and why it still looks like it was abandoned yesterday. Possible fugitive hideout. Let's face it, any cabin in the woods is creepy by default, but internet users took things to a whole new level recently when they discovered a shack in Florida's Big Slough Preserve, where they believe that Brian Laundrie may have hidden after being named a person of interest in the homicide of his girlfriend, Gabby Petito. Self-declared activist Andra Griffin shared footage of the cabin's interior, which shows pieces of wood and a partially collapsed ceiling scattered across the floor and on a bench. Some internet sleuths assumed that law enforcement probably never even bothered searching the cabin, while others speculated that it might serve as a hiding spot for killers in the future. The dilapidated structure is certainly off-putting, but whether or not Laundrie hid there will likely remain unknown. His partial remains were found around the same time the video appeared, leaving many unanswered questions surrounding Gabby's disappearance and death. Laundrie's cause of death has yet to be announced, and his role in the tragedy is also a mystery. Secret room behind the kitchen cupboard. One of the first things many people do when they move into a new house or apartment is explore. After all, you don't always get a chance to take an in-depth look when you go to view a property. While taking a peek around their new rental home recently, an unnamed couple found a room hidden behind the back of their kitchen cupboard. There is no normal door leading to the space, and the room has no flooring, yet it has a window and is filled with building materials. The confused couple documented their discovery on social media, hoping that maybe someone had some insight into why the room might be there, or perhaps why it was concealed. Some suggested that it was the perfect place for a serial killer to hide bodies. Others were less concerned with what the space was used for and were annoyed because the room was a waste of good natural light. While nobody could quite figure out the room's purpose, they had plenty of recommendations for putting the room to good use. One mom wrote that she'd turn it into a hideout for her kids, while another piped in that she'd use it as her own personal hideout for when her husband stresses her out. Upon taking a closer look at the room, the couple received one more unexpected surprise when they found vintage bottles of wine, some of which were more than 50 years old. Cheers! Sri Lanka's Stargate. The sacred city of Anuradhapura in Sri Lanka is full of mystery. It was first occupied in 377 BC, then turned into a major city complete with massive Buddhist temples. Among the Buddhist temples is something unusual that hasn't been seen anywhere else in Sri Lanka or surrounding countries of similar origin and culture. In this location alone, there is a chart carved into the rock that seems to hold secrets of the universe. A chart that some people say is a Stargate. The chart is hard to see now because it's so old, and because it wasn't carved deep enough into the rock face, but it clearly shows mysterious symbols that appear to be associated with the cosmos. There is also a seating area carved out of rock in front of the chart, where people would have presumably sat to stare at it. But historians, archaeologists, and academics have been hopeless in identifying the marks on the map or figuring out why a seat had been carved in front of it. The biggest problem is that the iconography of the chart is unlike anything else carved in the city. There are strange circles, horizontal lines, and other bizarre shapes that kind of look like umbrellas. Basically, the chart is completely out of place and doesn't make any kind of sense to us right now. Some argue that it's as if it was carved by a completely different civilization, but that doesn't have to be the case. By far, the most bizarre theory is that the Stargate was a functional teleporter used by aliens to move from place to place on the planet, especially since other similar carvings have been found as far away as Peru and Egypt. The Sumerian King List. Even after a century of research, the Sumerian King List is still puzzling historians. The King List is one of the most incredible artifacts ever recovered from Iraq, where the great cities of Sumer once controlled the world. The list itself is an ancient manuscript written in the original Sumerian language, listing all the kings that ever ruled in Sumer. The reason the Sumerian King List is so mysterious is that it not only lists historical kings, but also mythical rulers who aren't supposed to have ever existed. Historians can't figure out where to draw the line between fantasy and reality, and that's made it very difficult to properly document Sumer's ancient past. The first piece of the King's List was found in the 1900s by the scholar Herman Hilprecht at the ancient site of Nippur. It dates back 4,000 years. It's also not the only one. At least 8 other examples have been found since 1906. Although most of them date from the Essene dynasty that lasted from between 2017 and 1794 BC. To make matters more confusing, none of the ancient documents are identical. Instead, they appear to show an ideal account of Sumerian history, a kind of fanciful history similar to what we find in the stories written in the Bible. All the fantasy has made it impossible to know which kings were real and which kings were simply myth. Decapitated Romans. A group of decapitated Roman skeletons have been unearthed at 3 separate Roman cemeteries. The cemeteries were in the UK at a farm in Cambridgeshire. In total, 52 skeletons were found, all of them dating back about 1700 years. So far as archaeologists have been able to put together, the skeletons were once British Romans. This means they were technically born in Britain, but likely had Roman heritage. In any case, 17 out of the 52 skeletons were decapitated. The mystery here is that scientists can't quite figure out why some of them had their heads removed and others didn't. To make matters even stranger, those who had been decapitated had their head placed at their feet, and where their skull was supposed to be, a piece of pottery was placed instead. The best guess archaeologists have right now is that the decapitated individuals were executed for interfering with the Roman military. Because this particular farm was used as a supply center, and because there were so many civil wars happening at the time, it would make sense if there was some kind of rebellion here. The punishment for this sort of crime was definitely death. It could be that the rebels were killed, decapitated, and then buried in the most shameful way possible. If that's not the case, scientists don't know what happened to these poor people. The sword in the monastery. An archaeology student made probably the most amazing find of her lifetime when she took notice of a sword at an Italian museum. The museum is inside an ancient Venetian monastery, and the sword didn't seem to match any of the other medieval artifacts on display. The student, Vittoria dal Armelina, demanded that the sword be investigated, and this opened up an ancient mystery that still hasn't been solved. The Venetian monastery is located on San Lazzaro degli Armeni, a small island in Italy. Those at the monastery thought the sword was only a few hundred years old. After actually dating the sword using scientific methods, it was determined to be over 5,000 years old. It's also been traced back to eastern Turkey, the same part of the world in which swords were first invented during the Bronze Age. But how the sword got from the birthplace of the swordsmith to a random Italian monastery remains unknown. The monastery had been a congregation for Armenian Catholic monks ever since 1717. The sword was a donation gift from an Armenian art collector about 150 years ago. That art collector is obviously deceased now, and the only written records pertaining to the sword say that it was found near a small Greek colony called Kavak, located in eastern Turkey. No one knows who forged the sword, who owned the sword, or how it survived for so long, being passed between owners before arriving at the monastery. Works of the Old Men. Thousands of mysterious stone structures have been found throughout the Middle East, referred to in archaeological circles as the works of the old men. The stone structures form geometric patterns, often in the shape of wheels. Some of them date over 8,500 years, making them older than most other geoglyphs in the world, even the legendary Nazca lines in Peru. The works of the old men can be found scattered throughout the Azraq oasis in Jordan, and they seem to have some kind of astronomical significance. They may have been built to line up directly with the sunrise on the day of the winter solstice, but nobody really knows. The structures were first seen by pilots flying with the Royal Air Force in World War I. Mention of them first appeared in 1927 in the journal Antiquity, but even after all these years, archaeologists are still a bit stumped. Not only are there geoglyphs in the shape of wheels, but there are also shapes referred to as kites, which are stone structures that were built to funnel and kill animals, and pendants, which are lines of stone cairns. There are the remains of walls that don't seem to make any sense, lines of stone graves, and other mysterious structures that can't even be identified. They are all across Arabia, from Syria to Jordan and all the way down to Yemen. Some were even built as recently as 5,500 years ago, meaning for at least 3,000 years, the area was highly active. But why these geometric shapes were built, and how the ancient people could have possibly done it without having aerial capabilities, is still a mystery. The Maya Extinction. One of the biggest mysteries surrounding the Maya civilization is the fact that they seemingly evaporated into thin air, seemingly overnight. Of course, it's not that simple. The decline was gradual, happening over the span of a few decades. Even before the Spanish ever arrived in North America, the Maya had pretty much vanished. There were still some of the Mayan people lingering, but their great cities were abandoned and their society was in ruins. What we know today is that drought seriously impacted Mayan civilization. There were 5 serious droughts throughout the history of the Maya that didn't seem to bog them down too much. But then, 2 devastating droughts in a row happened right before their civilization fell apart. By the year 1150, the Mayans were gone. The droughts that destroyed this once great culture went on from between 850 to 1000 AD. Over the course of 150 years, they went from boom to bust. There are some theories. Some believe that the Maya kingdom was too densely populated. They weren't prepared for a dramatic and fundamental change to the landscape. They had cities of over 100,000 people and had cut down forests and manipulated wetlands to create more room for farming and urbanization. They accidentally ruined their own agricultural success because of extensive deforestation. By the time these droughts came along, the Maya had ruined their environment. What happened next was a complete collapse of civilization, with not enough food to feed the bustling cities filled with people. But of course, this is just a theory. Archaeologists and historians still can't figure out why the people didn't eventually go back to the cities. They still don't know exactly what happened in Mexico and Guatemala over 1,000 years ago, and can only make educated guesses as to the fate of the Maya. Iron Age Spinal Miracle. During the Iron Age, a man took an arrow to the spine. He survived long enough for his bone to heal around the point of metal, when by all accounts, the horrific spinal injury should have killed him. During what must have been a fierce battle, he was shot in the back, and the bronze arrowhead lodged into one of his vertebrae. He also had fractured ribs, but it's unclear if he sustained both injuries at the same time. According to Svetlana Zvayatko with the Queen's University Belfast, this person was extremely lucky to survive. Normally, a vertebral wound would damage the main blood vessels and result in an immediate death. Other than the fact that this warrior was incredibly hardy and basically unkillable, we don't know much more about him. He stood 5 feet 7 inches tall, a considerable giant for the Iron Age. The average height of a Scythian warrior was only 5 feet 4 inches. He was also buried in an impressive grave sometime around the 8th century BC in central Kazakhstan. This was the part of Central Asia dominated by the Scythians, powerful nomadic warriors, for hundreds of years until the 2nd century AD. Sadly, his grave had already been pillaged centuries ago. Archaeologists found nothing except his body and some other mysterious scattered bones. No one knows who this formidable and unkillable warrior once was. Hannibal's Elephants. Hannibal Barca was a Carthaginian general who fought against Rome during the Second Punic War. He was born in 247 BC and died in 182 BC, and ever since then, his name has been associated with great military genius. His most notable achievement was in 218 BC, when he led 100,000 troops and 40 elephants through the Alps to fight the Romans. But to this day, nobody has been able to figure out where he managed to pick up the famous 40 elephants. Keep in mind that ancient Carthage is located in modern Tunisia, extremely far away from any areas one might easily obtain elephants. As far as scientists are aware, there were only 2 species of elephants alive back then, the Asian and the African, and he wasn't anywhere close to where these elephants lived in the wild. Historians also aren't sure which type of elephant he had. All we know is that he had at least 40 of them. Some historians suggest he got the elephants from a small forest near Morocco, and that they were a subspecies that have since gone extinct. These hypothetical elephants would have grown 8 feet tall at the shoulders, perfect for military action. But it's honestly impossible at this point to say if these elephants ever did truly exist. If they did, it's possible that the great general Hannibal Barca helped hasten them along to extinction by taking them all with him through the Alps to battle the Romans. The Tomb of Alexander. We have been searching for the tomb of Alexander the Great for hundreds of years, and while it's never been physically found, an Egyptian official recently claimed that it's located in Siwa, Egypt. The claim is a bit flimsy though, since it was made by the director of Siwa's tourism department, the one guy who would profit most from Alexander's tomb being in his region. He says that between 1995 and 1996, archaeologists found a temple from the Greco-Roman era that could contain the tomb. Unfortunately, the tomb hasn't actually been found in the temple. Instead, the director is simply insinuating that it's hiding somewhere inside. It's completely unverified, although definitely possible. Alexander the Great did visit the Siwa oasis while in Egypt, and the region is so secluded that it wouldn't be a big shock if it contained a lost tomb. The Siwa oasis is even home to the fabled oracle's temple, where Alexander was given confirmation by the oracle that he was indeed the son of Zeus. Roanokes lost colony. In 1585, English settlers in the New World established a colony on the island of Roanoke in what is now North Carolina. All 115 settlers then mysteriously disappeared. To this day, archaeologists and historians have no idea what happened to them or why they vanished. It's actually one of the most enduring mysteries in the history of America. Archaeologist Martha Williams, along with others from the First Colony Foundation, found physical evidence that may help finally solve the enduring mystery. They discovered a secret message written on a very old map that seems to indicate the settlement split into different camps and were then assimilated into the local indigenous populations. Until now, most of the theories as to what happened to the colony have been pretty grim. grim. Some say the colonists were wiped out by Native Americans, that hostile Spaniards killed them all, or that they were decimated by disease, famine, or even a deadly storm. But the information discovered on the map, which is currently housed at the British Museum in London, shows that the colonists may have actually separated and made two different forts away from the original settlement. When archaeologists went to these locations to see if the forts really had been built, they found several dozen shards of English pottery. This suggests that there were people living here. However, they seem to have been incorporated by the local indigenous population, abandoning their new forts and disappearing into history. Human puppet. An archaeologist in the United Kingdom discovered an ancient corpse that appears to have been turned into some kind of human puppet. The discovery came out of the southwest of England, dug out of a turnip field of all places. It was excavated by archaeologist and farmer Dr. Martin Green. Martin happens to own a lot of property and has quite an obsession with archaeology, so he actually excavates his own fields in hopes of finding amazing stuff. I think we need to meet. The amazing thing is that he's almost never disappointed. He even has his own private museum filled with things that he's found buried on his farm, like skeletons, ancient cows, pieces of prehistoric tools, and much more. It was in 2009 when he uncovered the eerie human remains from thousands of years ago buried in his turnip field. They were the ancient bones of a teenage female, and upon inspection, Martin noticed her bones had drill holes in them, likely made from either a razor or some kind of sharp flint tool. The holes appeared to have been used as a method to prevent the girl's body from deteriorating after death. She had these drill holes in her legs and her arms, and it's believed that she had been strung together with primitive rope, like some kind of ancient human puppet. For some reason, somebody had tried their hardest to keep her as whole as possible after death. Whoever buried her wanted to keep her bones from separating, so they carved holes and made sure that each bone was linked together with string. The truly bizarre thing about this discovery is that nobody knows why this would have been done, as we still have a very limited understanding of what people believed in 3,000 years ago. Smoked corpses. In Papua New Guinea, you can find mummies that are far more terrifying than anything hiding in an Egyptian tomb. The Anga tribe, ancient people who live in the Aseki region of the country, are notorious for smoking their dead to create the grisliest mummies you would never want to see in your life. These people don't even wrap their dead in bandages or bury them. When a person dies, they are left fully to the elements, perched above a cliff to overlook the village where they originally lived. To us in the Western world, it might seem extremely creepy, but keep in mind that even the ancient Greeks would sometimes leave their dead on mountaintops to return to the elements. The mummification process starts with the removal of moisture from the corpse. Water is the main cause of decomposition, so those bodies need to be dried out completely like raisins. To do this as quickly and easily as possible, the Anga heat the remains over a fire. The body is cut open at the knees and the elbows and other joints, bamboo poles are stuffed into the slits, and then the insides are removed. There have been rumors that the leftover fluid from the bodies is used as a cooking oil, though this is complete hearsay and can't be proven. It is most likely a much more spiritual process like that of the Egyptians, who would remove all the internal organs and keep them in containers. Today, the mummies can still be seen overlooking the villages. They were first discovered by foreigners in 1907, when the British explorer Charles Higginson visited the area. But the practice came to an end in 1949, when missionaries finally settled in the region and convinced the tribespeople to discontinue their unusual mummification practices and convert to Christianity. Gruesome golden mask. A creepy golden mask from over 1,000 years ago is hiding a gruesome secret. In Peru, a man was buried inside a tomb filled with an unbelievable wealth of artifacts, jewels, and pure gold. He was flipped upside down, his head was separated from his body, and a metal mask was placed over his face. The mask is still around today, showing huge beaded eyes of pure black, a pair of decorative earrings, and a blank expression that's enough to give you the chills. And to make things even stranger, the mask, which was fastened to the severed head, and the body of the dead man were painted in streaks of red. This burial was discovered 30 years ago, and it creeped archaeologists out back then, too. But it was only recently that a team of researchers from the University of Oxford took an interest in the mask and the red paint. They were curious what made the red paint last over 1,000 years in the grave. They soon identified the red pigment as cinnabar, but there was another ingredient as well that bound the paint together and made it more robust. As it turned out, the second ingredient was human blood. The people responsible for the grave are known as the Lambayeque culture, and they predate the Inca by quite a lot. They lived in Peru between the 8th and 14th centuries and were obsessed with gold. The man buried here had 1.2 tons of treasure in his grave, most of which was gold. But why his head was taken off and he was buried with a mask of blood is still a total mystery. Mass Peruvian grave. Speaking of terrifying discoveries in Peru, here's another one, this time from the Chan Chan archaeological zone. This is the location of the largest city anywhere in the Americas before the Spanish arrived. The Chan Chan people, also called the Chimu, came after the Moche culture and flourished from the 12th to the 15th centuries, just up until the Inca arrived. Chan Chan was the main city, with excavations going on here consecutively since 1969. That's how large the city was, even 600 years ago when it collapsed in 1470. Found in this enormous ancient city was a mass grave. The grave contained the ancient remains of 25 young females, all members of the Chimu culture. These skeletons date back to around 1100 AD, or about 1,000 years ago. What's so strange is that none of the females were over the age of 30, and they were all buried in a seated position with their legs crossed. According to John Juarez, one of the men behind the excavations, it's likely that the women were garment makers. They were found with tools of their trade buried beside them, such as needles and spindles. But nobody can figure out why 25 garment makers were all buried at seemingly the exact same time. It may have been some sort of ritual sacrifice, but it is unlikely since there doesn't seem to be evidence of violence. Juarez and his team say that they could have been brought to one gravesite from different graves as some kind of bizarre attempt to keep all the seamstresses buried in the same place. A terrifying delicacy. Archaeologists have uncovered proof of a terrifying delicacy that was enjoyed in the medieval days of Europe. The delicacy is a creature called the lamprey, one of the most primitive types of jawless fish in the world. Based on fossil evidence, lampreys have been alive for over 360 million years in one form or another. They can be found pretty much everywhere in the world where it's temperate, living in coastal and even fresh waters. Archaeozoologist Alan Pipe says that lampreys were a popular delicacy in medieval Britain, specifically for nobility, but they were also eaten as far as Spain and Finland, always by the richest members of society. One of the most bizarre stories is that Henry I of England had such a hunger for lamprey meat that his doctor labeled his cause of death as eating too many of these feisty creatures. And if you don't believe it, as recently as 1953, at the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II, lamprey pie was actually baked and served as well. The actual teeth of a lamprey were discovered during excavations near Mansion House Station in London. Only the teeth were found because these animals don't have any bones or jaws, so they don't leave much of themselves behind. But it was enough to show direct evidence that Londoners love to eat these creepy critters. Would you ever eat one of these unusual sea creatures enjoyed by medieval nobles? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. We've got lots more videos like this coming up. And I wanted to give a big shout out to Nancy Macchio and Pokey Novakovic. Thanks so much for watching and supporting Origins Explained. The skeletons of Herculaneum. Archaeologists have discovered over 300 skeletons at the city of Herculaneum near ancient Pompeii. These skeletons once belonged to people who were alive in the year 79 AD, the year Mount Vesuvius erupted and decimated the city. But Pompeii was not the only place that got destroyed. The Roman city of Herculaneum was also devastated. It's just not nearly as famous as its sister city. To understand the difference between these cities a bit better, Herculaneum was much closer to the crater. Whereas Pompeii was buried under about 12 feet of volcanic ash, Herculaneum was buried under 69 feet of ash and other material. Most of that material turned into solid rock, which has made studying the second city a lot more challenging. As for the 300 skeletons, they were found on what used to be a beach. They appeared to have been trying to flee the catastrophic eruption when they were killed by a sudden surge of boiling material spewed out of the volcano. Archaeologists described it as a scene of horror. They were only about 4 miles from Mount Vesuvius when it erupted, meaning they would have been practically incinerated immediately as they ran, preserved in rock for 2,000 years. The spiked vampire. An extremely rare skeleton was discovered in Britain, with spikes jabbed through its shoulders, through its heart, and even through its ankles. Archaeologists say whoever buried this individual must have thought they were a vampire. What makes it so rare is that it was discovered in Britain, whereas most vampire burials are found in Eastern European countries like Romania. The person died sometime around the year 550 or 600, at the height of medieval paranoia. It's impossible to say what the locals thought this person was. It could have been a vampire, or it could have been a werewolf or a ghoul. The only thing that's certain is that the metal spikes stabbed through their body were to prevent them from ever getting out of their grave and feasting on the flesh of the living. City of the Dead. During routine excavations at Park Street in Birmingham in the United Kingdom, workers discovered human bones. At first, it seemed like maybe there was a small graveyard or something underneath the street that people had forgotten about centuries before. But once the archaeologists arrived, it became one of the biggest archaeological discoveries in the history of Birmingham. Over 6,500 skeletons were found right underneath the street. It turned out the road was actually a cemetery way back in the 19th century. The city of Birmingham was built quite literally on the backs of its workers. The skeletons that were exhumed from the massive grave were in rough condition. Some were babies and kids without coffins, some of them had their feet or hands missing, and many of the dead bodies were buried with bowls of salt. Why bury the dead with a sprinkle of salt? It was because prior to the 19th century, when a lot of these people were buried, the locals believed that salt would keep away evil spirits, and even the devil. The only way to prevent their loved ones from having their souls stolen after death was to bury them with a bowl of salt. Further analysis of the corpses showed that many of them had scurvy or rickets. They were in poor health when they died, and they had atrocious nutrition. They were most likely the inner city workers from hundreds of years ago who were buried in a kind of backlog cemetery for the poor. Skulls of the Huns. When it comes to terrifying skulls, nobody can beat the Huns. The Huns practiced extreme cranial modification during the 4th century AD. At least 23 deformed skulls were found in the Republic of Georgia, 17 in the country of Hungary, 13 in Germany, and 2 in the Czech Republic. All of these deformed skulls date back to what is known in European history as the Great Migration, which lasted between the 4th and 7th centuries. This was the same time that the Huns moved out of Russia and into the territory of the Romans, killing, burning, and looting all that they could. For the Europeans, the Huns weren't just terrifying because they were savage warriors, they also looked imposing because their skulls were way too large. Many of the Hun warriors practiced cranial deformation, making them appear alien and horrifying to the Europeans they were invading. They literally looked like nightmare warriors. But what's curious is that after the Huns invaded Europe, locals started to deform their heads just like them. This is despite the fact that cranial deformation had fallen out of style with the rise of the Roman Empire. It had been popular during the Bronze Age, but nobody really did it any longer, until the Huns showed up and started a revolution. It was the influence of the Huns that led to another 300 years of skull modification. The Taran Mummies. The Taran mummies were discovered by European explorers in the early part of the 20th century, deep in the deserts of western China. Many of these mummies were pulled out of the Xiaohe tomb, where they had been sleeping soundly for thousands of years. The remains of the people buried became mummified because of the natural dryness of the desert. What was once a lush riverbank 4,000 years ago is now a desert of sand. The only things still surviving in that brutal wilderness are the tall, upright poles jammed into the earth to mark the burials. These poles have survived the test of time, showing exactly where archaeologists needed to dig. In total, the cemetery had about 300 bodies in it, but unfortunately, it had been pillaged by grave robbers a very long time ago. People were originally buried here in the Bronze Age around 3,000 years before today. They left a pretty big window for all the important relics to be taken out of the grave by looters. All that the thieves left behind were the shockingly ugly and frightfully dry faces of 300 prehistoric dead people. Thanks for watching! Which amazing archaeological discovery creeped you out the most? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. See you next time! Bye!